Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we bring you a powerful story of betrayal, hidden truths, and the ultimate rebirth of a mother's dignity. Imagine dedicating 30 years of your life to building a sanctuary, only to have the person you loved most tear it down. This is the story of Eleanor, a woman who was pushed to the absolute edge by her own flesh and blood, only to discover that her true value was greater than anyone could ever steal. Let's dive in. If you don't want to comply with the senior living arrangement, then pack your bags and clear out of my house today. Those words didn't come from a stranger. They were hurled at me by Julian, my only son, while he stood in the center of the living room, refusing to look me in the eye. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I simply folded my handmade lace blouses, tucked away the fading photographs of a life that once made sense, and snapped my vintage leather suitcase shut. Exactly 1 hour later, a flawless pearl-black limousine pulled up to the curb. When Julian opened the front door to see who had come to fetch me, the smug satisfaction completely evaporated from his face. It was as if the very foundation of his world had split wide open. There is a unique, suffocating grief that comes when you look at the child you once nursed, the boy you taught to take his first fragile steps, and realize you are staring at a complete stranger. That was the exact weight in my chest when Julian evicted me from the estate. Let's be perfectly clear. It was my estate. Bought and paid for with 32 years of agonizing, meticulous labor, sewing bespoke bridal gowns for high society women. Every bead, every silk hemline, every prick of the needle paid for a brick of that property. But on that damp Sunday afternoon, none of my history mattered to them. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the heavy lunch platters, because my daughter-in-law, Vivian, frequently reminded me that my talents were best utilized away from the guests. My floral apron was damp, my worn, callous fingers trembling slightly under the running water. Julian stepped into the room, carrying that rigid, defensive scowl he always wore when he knew he was doing something inherently wrong. His father, Albert, had been gone for 13 years, and there was no one left to check his entitlement. "Mother, we need to finalize your living arrangements," Julian said, his voice flat, staring at the floorboards. Vivian slithered in right behind him, her freshly manicured acrylic nails tapping against the doorframe, her dark burgundy lipstick twisted into a faint, mocking smile. She crossed her arms, waiting for the performance to begin. "We've reached a family decision," Julian continued, clearing his throat. "The estate is simply too cramped for our growing needs. The children require their own dedicated spaces, and you are reaching an age where managing a property of this scale is unrealistic. It's time we transitioned you to an environment better suited to your limitations." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my voice to remain completely steady. "An environment better suited? You mean an institution, Julian? It's an elite, fully staffed assisted living community, mother," Julian barked, his impatience flaring. "They have activities, medical staff, peers your own age. The only accurate word you are looking for, Julian, is banishment," I replied evenly. That was when Julian lost his temper. "Then just get out. If you won't accept our help, take your things and leave my house." His shouting bounced off the hallway walls I had personally painted, a staircase I had polished every single day. Vivian didn't even try to hide her triumphant smirk. In that exact moment, something inside me didn't break, it solidified. The illusion of my family was dead. I looked at my son, smiled a chillingly calm smile and said, "Very well, Julian. I'll be out by the hour." When the doorbell rang 60 minutes later, Julian opened it with a frustrated groan, expecting a taxi. Instead, he faced Arthur Sterling, the billionaire chairman of Sterling Global Logistics, his late father's closest business partner, and the most influential man in the city. Arthur walked right past my son as if he were made of glass, offering me his arm. "Eleanor, my dear, your new home is ready." I looked back at Julian one last time. "The house is all yours, son. Enjoy the space." As the limousine glided away, I looked out the tinted glass. Julian was still standing frozen on the porch, watching his mother depart in absolute luxury. For the first time in 3 long years, I breathed in the scent of freedom. But as the city lights began to blur through the luxury car windows, I had no idea that Arthur's sudden rescue wasn't a random twist of fate. He was hiding a massive confession. One that would rewrite the last 40 years of my life and trigger a financial war that would bring Julian to his knees. What did Arthur know? Stay tuned for the next part to find out. The interior of the vehicle smelled of fine Italian leather and expensive cedarwood. Arthur sat perfectly composed, keeping a respectful distance, allowing me the space to process the absolute collapse of my domestic life. My hands were still shaking, gripping the handle of my old suitcase as if it were a life raft. "Are you holding up, Eleanor?" Arthur asked, his voice a deep, comforting baritone. "I feel detached from reality, Arthur," I whispered, looking out at the sprawling New York skyline. "It's a strange thing to realize your own blood views you as a tenant to be evicted." We arrived at his residence, a breathtaking ultramodern glass tower in the heart of Manhattan. The white-glove security personnel bowed with deep reverence as Arthur guided me toward the private elevator. The mirrored walls of the elevator car reflected a 68-year-old woman in a simple cotton dress, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes bearing the heavy shadows of unspoken grief. "You are just as striking today as you were the morning I met you, Eleanor," Arthur said softly, catching my gaze in the mirror. I smiled tiredly, shaking my head, but the absolute sincerity in his eyes made me pause. When the penthouse doors slid open, I was completely stunned. Double-height ceilings, sweeping panoramic views of Central Park, and marble floors flooded with the golden light of the setting sun. "Your private suite is up the grand staircase," Arthur explained gently, gesturing to a porter who immediately took my worn suitcase. "It features an independent terrace, a spa bathroom, and complete privacy. This property belongs to you now, Eleanor. Make yourself entirely at home." That evening, alone in that massive, luxurious room, the emotional dam finally broke. I sat on the edge of the plush bed and wept for every slight, every insult, and every silent sacrifice I had endured under Julian and Vivian's roof. By 8 p.m., my smartphone was vibrating continuously on the nightstand. Julian, 52 missed calls. Vivian, 18 text messages. "Mother, who was that man? Where are you staying? We need to discuss the house title immediately. Please answer. We are worried about your mental state." I turned the device completely off and placed it face down. A quiet tap sounded at the door. Arthur entered carrying a silver service tray with a fresh pot of chamomile and lemon verbena tea, my absolute favorite blend. He set it down by the window hearth and poured 2 cups with practiced grace. "Albert always mentioned this was your evening ritual when the work weeks were long," Arthur noted quietly. Hearing my late husband's name caused a bittersweet ache in my chest. "Arthur, how did you know to show up today? It couldn't have been mere timing." Arthur looked down at his teacup, his expression shifting into a complex mix of sorrow and resolve. "It wasn't an accident, Eleanor. I've had an investigator quietly keeping watch on that household for months. I knew the moment Vivian began scouting those cheap care facilities. I simply waited for you to see their true nature yourself, so I could pull you out of the ash heap." He paused, setting his cup down, looking directly into my eyes. "There is something I have carried in absolute silence for more than 4 decades, Eleanor. From the precise afternoon Albert introduced you as his bride-to-be, when you wore that simple yellow sundress with the daisies, I knew I had missed the only true love of my life. Albert was my partner and my dearest friend, so I locked my feelings away out of profound respect. I built my empire, I married, I raised my family, but my heart never wandered from you. When my wife passed 5 years ago, I still lacked the courage to disturb your peace. But when I saw Julian treating a queen like an unwanted burden, I swore I would never let you be alone again." I sat frozen, tears spilling over my cheeks. For years, I had been treated as an invisible domestic fixture. To hear a billionaire speak to me with such profound, reverent adoration was dizzying. He leaned forward, kissing my forehead with a gentle, sacred reverence, and left the room. The following morning, Arthur requested I wear my finest attire for an appointment downtown. An hour later, we entered the high-security corporate offices of Sampson and Associates. Dr. Oliver Sampson, a brilliant, sharp-eyed attorney, unsealed a thick blue folder labeled the estate of Albert Montgomery. "Mrs. Montgomery," Dr. Sampson began, adjusting his spectacles, "Mr. Sterling has already transferred minority ownership shares of 3 prime commercial developments into your name, guaranteeing you an independent monthly liquidity of $100,000. But that is not why we are here. We are here to talk about your husband's actual legacy and the devastating fraud committed by your son. Julian had convinced me for over a decade that my husband left the family entirely broke, forcing me to sell my own assets just to survive. But as Dr. Sampson flipped open the certified audit, a multi-million-dollar secret emerged. One that would turn Julian's glamorous lifestyle into a criminal nightmare. Keep watching because the real retribution was just getting started. What fraud, Dr. Sampson? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as Arthur took my hand. The attorney pulled out a certified, notarized document bearing my late husband's signature from 13 years ago. Your son Julian informed you that Albert died in severe debt, correct? He claimed the business was liquidated to cover liabilities, leaving only the family home. Yes, I replied. He told me I needed to sign management paperwork so he could salvage what little was left. Dr. Sampson shook his head, a look of profound disgust crossing his features. Your husband was a co-founder of Montgomery Sterling Holdings. At the time of his passing, his personal equity was valued at 40% of the entire firm. According to this explicit certified will, that 40% was left entirely to you, Eleanor. Julian was only granted a minor administrative stipend. The room seemed to spin. But Julian told me. Julian lied. Dr. Sampson interrupted firmly. He used the power of attorney you signed in your grief to systematically transfer those shares into a shell corporation under his exclusive control. 2 years ago, he liquidated those exact shares to an overseas investment consortium for $4.2 million. Your legal 40% share was worth $1,680,000. With compounding interest and unauthorized asset diversion, your son currently owes you a total of $2.3 million. While I was sleeping in a tiny, unventilated back bedroom that resembled a utility closet, while Vivian was treating me like an unpaid housekeeper, my son was funding his luxury lifestyle with my stolen inheritance. Authorize the litigation, I said, a dangerous, cold clarity washing over me. I want a full forensic accounting, asset freezes, and a formal civil summons served immediately. Dr. Sampson smiled, the razor-sharp grin of an assassin in a bespoke suit. The paperwork is already finalized. He will be formally served within 48 hours. 3 weeks passed in absolute silence. I ignored every hysterical message from Julian. Thanks to Arthur's resources, I had completely transformed. I no longer looked like a beaten-down mother. I looked like the elegant, powerful matriarch I was born to be. On a crisp Saturday evening, I unblocked Julian's number and placed a brief call. Grant's Restaurant. 8 p.m. sharp. You and Vivian. Do not keep me waiting. When I arrived at the high-end establishment, Julian and Vivian were already seated in a secluded booth, looking utterly haggard. When I walked in, their jaws dropped. I wore a sophisticated black mid-length dress I had tailored myself, diamond earrings courtesy of Arthur's family collection, and a striking crimson lipstick. Julian scrambled to his feet, attempting an embrace. I coolly stepped aside and took my seat across from them, signaling the sommelier. A glass of your finest vintage Cabernet, please. Mother, please, the court summons. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. Julian stammered, his face a ghostly shade of white. I opened my leather clutch, pulled out a duplicate copy of the forensic audit, and slid it across the white tablecloth. Is it a misunderstanding that you forged my signature on the asset liquidation documents 2 years ago to steal $1.68 million of your father's money, Julian? Is it a misunderstanding that while I was hand-washing your linens, you bought that luxury timepiece on your wrist with my capital? Vivian attempted to intervene, her voice shrill. Eleanor, you can't possibly prove. Be completely silent, Vivian, I snapped, my eyes locking onto her with a force that made her physically recoil. You are an interloper in this family. You stole my mother's vintage jewelry box from my dresser, sold the contents for a fraction of their worth, and used the proceeds to fund your private excursions. Do you truly think I am blind? Julian buried his face in his hands, trembling. The company was faltering, Mother. I was desperate to maintain our social standing. You were desperate to maintain an illusion, I replied icily. You evicted me to clear room for Vivian's walk-in closet, completely oblivious to the fact that every single brick of that house was paid for by my labor. You have 15 days to settle the full $2.3 million civil demand, or Dr. Sampson will move forward with criminal grand larceny charges. I stood up, adjusting my coat, leaving them drowning in their own panic. I walked out of that restaurant victorious, believing the worst was over. But a cornered snake is at its most lethal. Vivian, realizing her life of luxury was about to evaporate, orchestrated a grotesque retaliation using the only leverage she had left, my beautiful grandchildren. What did she do? The next part will shock you. The blow came early Tuesday morning. Dr. Sampson called with an urgent, tense tone. Eleanor, Vivian has retaliated through the family courts. She has just filed an emergency ex parte restraining order against you. My blood ran cold. On what grounds? She has alleged that you suffer from cognitive decline and made explicit verbal threats against her life during your dinner encounter, Dr. Sampson explained. Furthermore, she has requested a total suspension of your visitation rights with Peter and Alice, claiming your erratic behavior is causing severe emotional trauma to the minors. It felt as though a blade had been plunged into my chest. My grandchildren were my absolute world. The Friday afternoons baking chocolate confections, the bedtime stories. Vivian was stripping them away to punish me for demanding my inheritance. The morning of the family court hearing, I sat in the austere, sterile courtroom. Vivian sat across the aisle, dressed in an unnaturally modest navy dress, her eyes downcast, weeping softly for the judge's benefit. Julian sat beside her like a hollowed-out shell, completely under her thumb. Vivian's aggressive representation stood before the bench. Your Honor, my client lives in an environment of perpetual terror. The defendant explicitly threatened to ensure Mrs. Montgomery ended up in a correctional facility. The children, Peter and Alice, are exhibiting severe psychological regression, bedwetting, and anxiety due to the defendant's hostile interventions. When the judge turned to me, I stood up, completely poised despite the roaring in my ears. Your Honor, my statement regarding a correctional facility was not a threat. It was a statement of impending legal fact regarding massive financial fraud. I love my grandchildren with every fiber of my soul. The judge reviewed the preliminary motions. Given the severe nature of the civil litigation currently pending between the parties, I am granting a partial restriction. The defendant is strictly prohibited from entering the primary residence of the plaintiffs. However, complete termination of grandmotherly contact is denied. Visitation will occur once per week in a strictly monitored, neutral municipal location. It wasn't a total defeat, but seeing Vivian's smug, satisfied smile as we exited the courthouse made my stomach turn. I broke down in Arthur's arms on the pavement outside. She's using the children as human shields, Arthur, I cried. She's destroying their innocence just to protect her stolen wealth. Arthur held me tightly, his eyes blazing with a fierce, quiet, protective rage. She thinks she has played a master stroke, Eleanor. But she has no concept of the trap she has walked into. That night, Arthur presented me with a thick, leather-bound dossier compiled by his private intelligence team. Eleanor, look at these financial summaries. Arthur pointed to a series of highly irregular corporate ledger entries. Julian's primary business is not merely struggling. It is completely underwater due to reckless capital distribution and hidden withdrawals. Over the last 8 months, I have quietly purchased every single piece of his outstanding institutional debt through various holding companies. I am currently your son's largest primary creditor. I hold the legal power to foreclose on his entire life tomorrow morning. But as I spent the night analyzing the detailed bank statements, my eyes caught a series of hidden, domestic transfers that even Julian didn't know about. Vivian wasn't just a cruel daughter-in-law. She was a financial vampire who was systematically bleeding my son dry to fund a secret life with another man. The evidence hidden within those files was enough to completely dismantle her entire world. Stay tuned for the final showdown, where the truth explodes in the courtroom. The next morning, I retained a premier forensic accounting firm to perform a deep dive audit into Julian's corporate accounts, alongside a certified child welfare investigator, to document the reality of my grandchildren's daily life under Vivian's care. 7 days later, the dual reports arrived. The data was absolutely staggering. Julian isn't just an incompetent businessman, Dr. Sampson noted as we convened in the penthouse. He is an unmitigated victim of marital embezzlement. Over a 3-year period, Vivian systematically funneled over $340,000 out of his corporate accounts into a hidden offshore entity. That money was utilized to purchase a luxury oceanfront condominium in Miami solely under her maiden name, and to fund an ongoing, high-end lifestyle for her extramarital partner, a fitness instructor named Ethan. My jaw tightened. And the children? The welfare investigator stepped forward, displaying timestamp surveillance footage. Mrs. Montgomery completely neglects the minors. Peter was documented waiting outside his academy gate for over 2 hours after dismissal because his mother forgot the schedule. The children are consistently left unsupervised while she visits the downtown fitness club. The emotional distress the children are experiencing is entirely caused by the volatile arguments between the parents regarding their vanishing wealth. I looked at the absolute mountain of crushing evidence. I had the power to completely annihilate them both. But Julian was still the boy I had raised. We schedule an emergency global settlement conference, I commanded firmly. Bring Julian, Vivian, and their legal counsel to our offices. I will offer them one final alternative. On Tuesday morning, the conference room was thick with absolute dread. Vivian entered with her usual defensive arrogance, but the moment Dr. Sampson activated the projector, displaying certified deeds to her hidden Miami condominium, joint bank statements with her lover, and explicit neglect footage of the children, her face turned ash gray. Julian stared at the screen, his chest heaving as the realization of his wife's total betrayal settled over him. Vivian, you transferred my operational capital to an account with another man? You bought a property with my father's legacy. Julian, please, it's entirely out of context, she whimpered. But her own attorney put his head in his hands, realizing the case was utterly indefensible. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through the room like shattered glass. Here are my non-negotiable terms, Julian. Arthur holds over $520,000 of your personal corporate debt. I am willing to completely forgive that entire liability and provide an operational restructuring loan under 3 strict mandates. I slid the legal instrument across the glass table. First, you file for immediate, uncontested divorce from Vivian based on egregious marital fraud and dissipation of assets, securing sole custody of Peter and Alice. Second, you enter intensive family counseling alongside the children and myself. Third, you sign a legal confession of judgment to repay the stolen $1.68 million inheritance to my estate over a 10-year, interest-free amortization schedule. And if we reject this? Vivian's attorney asked quietly. If you reject it, we hand this dossier to the district attorney for grand larceny, embezzlement, and criminal child endangerment before lunch, Dr. Sampson replied without a hint of hesitation. Mrs. Montgomery will face extensive federal prison time, Julian will enter total bankruptcy, and Eleanor will secure absolute custody of the children through the state. Julian looked at his trembling wife, then up at me, tears streaming down his face. The spell was finally broken. He reached for the executive pen and signed his name firmly on the settlement line. Vivian screamed, cursing my name as building security calmly escorted her out of the corporate suite forever. 6 months have passed since that faithful morning. The crisp autumn air of September now streams through the windows of my beautiful new Manhattan residence. Vivian's luxury asset in Miami was seized and auctioned off to cover her legal liabilities, and she is currently completing her extensive community service hours. Julian now resides in a modest, sunlit apartment in Brooklyn, working diligently as a senior logistics coordinator. The elite titles are gone, but for the first time in his life, he sleeps with an absolute clear conscience. Today is Saturday. The doorbell rings and my heart leaps with the exact same joy every single week. Grandma! Alice shouts, throwing her small arms around my neck, showing off her missing front teeth. Peter follows right behind her, carrying a massive bag of organic baking ingredients. Julian stands in the doorway, a healthy, genuine smile illuminating his eyes. Good morning, Mother. Good morning, my son. I reply, pulling him into a warm, forgiving embrace. Arthur steps out from the kitchen, a linen apron tied around his waist, winking at the children. Well, are the master chefs ready to create the most spectacular chocolate cake this city has ever seen? The children cheer, racing toward the kitchen counter. Julian stands beside me watching them play. Thank you, Mother, for not abandoning me when I was entirely blind. "You are my flesh and blood, Julian," I whisper, squeezing his hand. A mother may step back to let her son learn his lesson, but she never truly turns away. They thought they could diminish my worth, hide my legacy, and cast me into the shadows. But they failed to realize that a woman forged in sacrifice is like a diamond. You can subject her to the most intense pressure imaginable, but she will never break. She will only learn how to shine brighter. Looking back, I realize that our greatest betrayals are often the exact catalysts required to lead us toward our true purpose, our dignity, and the authentic meaning of home. What an incredible journey of resilience and transformation. When pushed to the brink, Eleanor chose strategy, dignity, and ultimate grace. Now I want to hear from you. If you found yourself in Eleanor's position, facing such a deep betrayal from family, would you have offered Julian that final chance at redemption, or would you have walked away entirely? Share your unique perspectives in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because we have so many more profound stories of family, courage, and rebirth coming straight from the heart. See you in the next video.